Hi, it's Jo and Steve from Fresh Agenda, and for this week's Weekly Take, we thought we'd have a bit of a look at what's happening with Fonterra. So this week we had an announcement from the new CEO, Miles Hurrell, that Fonterra's dropping their 30 billion litre target, which was part of their V3 strategy under the previous regime. So we just thought we'd have a look back at what the journey's been for Fonterra. And this chart really looks at some of the big, I suppose, moments in time over the last decade or so, and what's happened with developments in New Zealand and at the same time Fonterra. So
interesting comparison with Australia.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
So, you know, there's been some big things. The other thing that couldn't quite fit on that slide was the launching of the Fonterra Shareholders Fund and trading amongst farmers in about 2012, when Fonterra was trying to, I guess, address the issue of capital for that next phase of expansion. But what we saw over the last decade or so is really New Zealand riding that Chinese wave of import growth.
Yeah, and there's been some hiccups on the way there.
Yeah, and so this chart really illustrates that very starkly, that we saw that huge rise in whole milk powder.
It was a gearing up for the promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a good promise. I mean, the Chinese story ran riot as being the big driver of the requirement of milk powder that seemingly was going to go on forever. It hasn't, and interesting how the New Zealand growth stopped when that peaked. Weather and other things intervened, obviously, but China is gradually, in terms of milk powders, slowly building back that output. So it's
That's
right. It's a long road back.
So it's really flattened out. This is, just an example of what we're seeing now, the headlines that I guess fairly prominent. I just did a Google search today on Fonterra, and this is what came up in my first few searches. So obviously a lot of pressure building for Fonterra amongst the community in New Zealand, the government, obviously their shareholders and suppliers. And so the V3 strategy that's been in place since 2012. And I think the V3 referred to volume to value add with velocity.
Yep.
And as we see there, this was from the investor presentation that was given in December last year. So those targets were still very much there. The 30 billion litre target is gone, and the 35 billion revenue target also looks pretty tough from here, doesn't it, Steve?
It does. It's if you look at the history of revenue growth, while we've seen it lift in recent years, and some of that is market value increasing, unit value increasing. It's a 70% increase in the next 7 years to achieve that target. So that you got to imagine that's going to come under scrutiny. And does an absolute total revenue target mean much when you're looking at that? That's
right. And I guess you would say a volume target means even less. So with plateauing actual volume growth, that target in terms of revenue looks tougher from here. But the unit value story might be a better one for them, with less milk coming at them in future. So this is just some of the content from our Longview 2030 report, which is out and available on our website.
Just released.
And it just looks at some of the struggles for Fonterra in terms of implementing this V3 strategy and moving to a more value-added product. And you can see there those reference products are basically the commodity products for Fonterra. They have shifted away from those somewhat, but the velocity has not been a quick one.
No, velocity doesn't necessarily have a dimension of speed. It is a progressive statement. So in last couple of years, we could see that percentage of solids going to commodity has dipped a little. You can see that widening gap in the bottom chart, the growth over the widening margin between milk value and commodity value of products. But on the right-hand side, stark contrast with what's been achieved in terms of... So that's showing the average per kilo milk solids export value achieved by various competitors. And that's when you look at Europe. So those big cooperative models in Europe pushing product out into markets, capturing a lot more value. totally different product mix.
Absolutely.
Very different access.
Lots of UHT, lots of infant formula, but again, these are the kind of
Well, they're the benchmarks.
high value.
It's talking about how much milk value you capture.
Yeah.
So the challenge is real.
Yeah,
as you
that's
say.
right. Another measure, and this is obviously fairly important for Fonterra suppliers, and just to bring it back to that comparison with Australia, Australia, you would argue, has had a much tougher time in terms of riding that Chinese wave. We've had very little production growth, but we're starting to see those prices converge again, Steve, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Australia's unit value is picking up for different reasons. I mean, we've got a lot, niche players picking premium markets. Can that hold? And that's obviously important. Does it flow back to farmers?
Yeah.
Big question for Australia.
That is a big question, and that comes back to the structures we've got in place, which is, very different from the New Zealand situation. So we weren't wanting to bash Fonterra in this, but we were just thinking about the lessons that I guess come from this longer term perspective on where Fonterra has been and what it's up against.
So talk us through these.
Well, the volume target, it was a big, hairy, audacious goal, perhaps, and that's a good thing. But I guess the lesson is scale is important, but it's not sufficient. So Fonterra, certainly the model was about having the scale to take on international competitors and be dominant in the international market. And scale gives you that, but it's not enough to actually extract high value from the market. And the other sub-point there is, yes, China was a growing market opportunity, but do you need to have that whole market, or do you choose the segment that you're best equipped to fill? You need to carefully define value add. I think a lot of companies fall into this trap. Value add has to be more than cost add, or it actually doesn't contribute to profit. And value add doesn't have to be consumer facing. That's sort of where all the sexy stuff is. Branded products, finished products.
And the discussion in New Zealand is kicking around these 2 points.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of discussion around. Does it mean customised ingredients where you capture a higher value of a base product supplied to someone, turning that into a premium product, or do you have to have brands in markets?
That's right.
Which are very expensive to maintain.
Very expensive to have that infrastructure, and obviously you're also up against some competitors who are also potentially very important customers. So it's a really fine line to tread. And then the other thing was, Fonterra is quite a unique model in the way that it's structured within the context of New Zealand. What is the best use of that specific resource and structure? You really do need to think, what can you do that no one else can do, and what shouldn't you do that a lot of other people can do better? And also you have to really be focused on that objective or that model single-mindedly. Don't get distracted by some other activities that may or may not pay off. And obviously you need to be aware of the changing global context, and really when you look back over that journey, there's been some massive changes in terms of China coming in, China going out, EU being unleashed in terms of their production potential and the way they've approached those markets which we might have thought in this part of the world were ours.
So if you go back to 2010, 2012 and those strategies were formulated, you sit in the marketplace now between here and next year and look forward and say the context around this is radically different. So Europe unleashed 160 billion litres, capturing a lot more value, US chugging along. So developing strategy in that context, that's what our Longview platform lets you look at. How does that shape out over time? I mean, Europe is adjusting to a commercial environment. So I think there's probably been an assertion that Europe might shrink or struggle with volatility. They're actually growing pretty well, and they're adapting to a freer market. It's not free at all, but so that's going to be interesting to see how that responds, because that's a very, very effective and well integrated competitor.
That's right, and obviously pursuing a lot of free trade agreements around the world and in our markets.
Unquestionably, they have their government on board.
For sure, for shizzle. Strategic partnerships, Fonterra's had a few, and obviously they can be fantastic, but do they support the model, and choose your partners carefully is I guess the other lesson for this, which is an easy one with hindsight, but certainly there's been a fair bit of pain. So
how do they contribute to that single-minded model that you've...
For sure.
Okay, chart of the week.
Yeah.
You come up with this time?
Well, the chart of the week this week, we're skipping over to Europe, and the European Commission has just had another tender, which it would consider, I think, a very successful one. It's shifted a bit of product, slightly higher price, and Commissioner Hogan's pretty pleased with the result and the way the market's been managed, isn't he, Steve?
He's taking a lot of credit for this, and here's a picture of another Hogan telling someone important to him how good a job he's done. Saying that the market management mechanisms have worked because it's managed to ensure that butter values have kept rising and that the skim value is slowly improving as well. I would say the weather's got a bit to do with this. The butter market's been up and down and spiked around, but European milk supply's been stressed in the last 6 months. Where it goes from here has a lot to do with how the market is responding to these releases.
Yes.
There's also, with cheap product, yes, there's a market out there that's very keen on cheap skim.
Yeah.
So just let it play out for a while before we can claim victory.
Sure.
That's good. Okay, that's probably a wrap. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week.
I came to get down.